We're going to wrap up eyeshadow palette week by ranking all of my 16 eyeshadow palettes. I created a scaled system based off of 4 data points, which were cost, versatility, performance, and preference. And I ranked each one of these 4 categories on a scale of 1 to 4 for each of my 16 eyeshadow palettes. And in coming into this experiment, I had in my mind what I thought my favorite eyeshadow palette would be. And I'm very surprised that it actually is not the most highly rated based off of my point system that I created. If you like project panning content, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel because I like to talk about project panning and beauty and mindful consumerism. So go ahead and subscribe before we get farther along. And if you are familiar with my channel, leave a comment right now to let me know what you think my top rated eyeshadow palette is. First, let's go ahead and talk about the criteria for each category. That way you kind of know what was going on in my brain while I was ranking each of these eyeshadow palettes. For cost, I have eyeshadow palettes that cost from $10 all the way to $69. So what I did was created my 4-point scale. A 4 were the palettes that were priced between $10 and $20. A 2 was a $20 to $30 palette. A 3 was a $40 to $50 palette, and a 4 was anything above like $55. So that's kind of how I ranked that. Versatility was something in which I looked at the color story and based off of my opinion how versatile I thought this palette was. If something's kind of monochromatic, then it's not going to be as versatile as something with 10 plus colors in it. So that was kind of how I ranked that. 1 being not versatile and 4 being very versatile. Preference was again based off of a 1 to 4 scale, and that was something that I did for my personal preference. Do I gravitate towards this color story all the time? Is this something that I'm really going to reach for on the daily and be able to use all the shades on the daily because I just find that that suits my makeup style, not pushing me out of my comfort zone, but totally in my comfort zone. 1 being pushing me out of my comfort zone and 4 being right there in it. And performance was of course based off of things like powderiness and kick up, fallout, longevity of the eyeshadows, and do they stay on my eyes really nicely, things like that. So let's go ahead and get started with the lowest rated eyeshadow palette, which was my NARS Summer Unrated palette. This palette ranked in at a 1 for cost because it costs around $60. Versatility, I gave it a 2 because really it's a very similar tones and your looks are not going to vary a whole lot with this palette. Preference, I gave it a 2 also because I do find that while I do love this color story, some of the shades like this glitter, I don't really tend to gravitate towards glitter a whole lot. So I kind of knocked it down a few points for shades like this one right here, this one, and this one, which are sort of like satin but unique satin shades. So really these 3 shades right here were the cause of it being a 2 for a preference. And on performance, I gave it a 3 because I feel like the mattes and shimmers and satins and glitters all perform really nicely. My eyeshadow looks stay really well all day long and I don't have any problem with major fallout. I did knock it down a little bit because it's so tightly pressed that you have to build it up a lot. So I did knock it down a point for that. So overall, my NARS Summer Unrated scored a 2. Next up is my Natasha Denona Yucca palette, and this scored a 1 on cost because it cost $69, although I did not pay $69, but this is what the price, the retail price of this palette was. For versatility, I gave it a 2 because there are a lot of greens in here, and that if you open this palette up, you're gonna get green or kind of maybe a brown or maybe an orange. You've got different tones of green, lots of different tones of green, but when you open this palette up, you're going to get green. And while that's not a bad thing, it doesn't make it very versatile. For preference, I gave this a 2 also because this palette I do love a lot. I find it so beneficial within my makeup collection, but it's beneficial because it pushes me out of my comfort zone. It does have some muted greens, which really kind of keep me comfortable, but it does push me out of my normal like browns and rosy mauve tone shadows that I do prefer. And for performance, I gave it a 3. Also because I do have to use a glitter glue with these shimmers in here because there is major fallout and the mattes are very tightly pressed, so you do have to build things up a lot. So overall, this eyeshadow palette scored a 2.25. Funny enough, the next 3 palettes are all nude palettes, ranking in at 2.25 each. So let's talk about the 3 nude palettes that scored the same. My Huda Nude palette scored a 3 for price because when this came out a long time ago, it was only $42, which is a lot better than its counterpart nude that we'll talk about here in a second. So I got a 3 because it was $42. For versatility, I gave it a 2 because when you look at this eyeshadow palette, you're going to get pink, purpley, mauve tones. There's really not much else you can do with it. You can kind of get a little bit of a brown tone. However, those brown tones, while they don't look like it in the pan, they do have just an underlying hint of pink. For preference, I also gave this a 2 because while I do really like mauve tones, there are some like really deep mauve tones that kind of scare me. And also, I don't use these glitter shades. I don't really prefer to have like a concealer in the palette itself. So, kind of looking at overall, this eyeshadow palette isn't my 100% preference. I think these tones are, but these ones are a little pushing me out of my comfort zone, which is fine. But when I'm thinking about what makes my heart really, really happy, it would be only like half of the palette. For performance, I gave this a 3 also. 1, because I don't like glitters, and these have a lot of fallout. These other like little flaky, glittery shimmers have a lot of fallout. So you really have to be very careful with that. And also the mattes in Huda's palettes are very tightly packed, but these you don't have to build up a whole lot. They are pretty pigmented all on their own with 1 or 2 kind of swipes. So overall, this palette got a 2.25, as did my Huda Naughty Nude palette. So the Naughty Nude palette got a 1 for cost because it is $69 retail, and I did not pay that, but that's what it retails at. I gave it a 2 for versatility because you can get some pinky mauve colors and you can get some brown colors. So you do have a couple of different options on which direction you're gonna go. And these brown tones are brown. They're not like the ones in here that look brown, but they're not brown. These are really brown tones. And these sort of like really deep plummy colors bridge the gap between the brown and the mauve. So they're really, really good. For preference, I gave this palette a 3 because this is my color story. I do really like these tones overall. Golden, brown, orange, mauve tones. I think that goes really well with my overall vibe. I didn't give it a 4 just because of maybe like this broke when I bought it. I don't really need this kind of shade, the sticky like primer shade in there. I don't really need that. And then sometimes these like swirled shades sometimes can be a little tricky to work with. And for performance, I gave her a 4. This palette doesn't have any fallout, and I feel like Huda's formula for mattes is really, really easy to work with. You don't have to take a lot of time to make an impact on your eyes when you use Huda's mattes or shimmers. So overall, 2.25. And the last 2.25 was my Natasha Denona I Need a Nude, which came in at a 1 for cost because it is $69, very expensive. A 2 for versatility because, let's face it, while she's gorgeous, you don't have a whole lot of options. You can get a little bit of some rosy tone and you can get a little bit of some taupey tone, but you're really not going to get much else after that. For preference, I gave it a 3 because I do really gravitate towards the rosy tones, but the taupey tones do kind of push me out of my comfort zone a little bit. And for performance, I give it a 4. I really don't have to use a glitter glue with any of these glitters and shimmers and things like that. I feel like you can build up your look very quickly with the mattes and things like that. And overall, I have good staying power and don't have to take any extra lengths in order to make this one work for me. So 2.25 for Natasha's I Need a Nude. The next two palettes are ranking in at 2.75, and I have first my Persona Identity palette, which gets a 3 for cost at $42. It makes it a really great value and a moderately high-end priced palette. For versatility, I gave it a 3 because I feel like you can do one shadow looks, you can get a more defined dimensional look, you can do a little bit of purple, brown, the orange, the warm orange really kind of makes things pop. So between the taupey shimmers and the browns and the purples, I feel like you have a little bit more options with this one. For preference though, I gave it a 1 because this is definitely not my preference. Cool tone shades are really out of my comfort zone. They really do push me, and I'm not quite sure that this eyeshadow palette looks the best on me out of all of my eyeshadow palettes. To me, this one does me the least amount of favors, so I'm gonna give it a 1. But for performance, it's a 4. This palette is amazing. The shimmers are so buttery and smooth. No flaking, no fallout, nothing like that. And the mattes are so incredibly pigmented, maybe a little too much, but they are really, really lovely at all. And you don't have a whole lot of fallout within this palette. So overall, it gets a 2.75, and while it might not be my preference, it's a really good palette. And next up at 2.75 was Huda's Rose Quartz palette, which gets a 1 for cost because it was $69. Even though I didn't pay that, that is what it retails for. For versatility, I gave it a 3 because I feel like, again, you have several options for pinks, purples, browns. You have shimmers of all kinds of colors, dark, light, swirled, multi-chrome. You can do a whole lot with this palette, and I love the versatility that this offers. And this is a cool toned palette that I feel like complements me better than the Identity palette. So I do really like this one, and for preference, I gave it a 3 because I do love all of these tones. I think they complement me. I think they're easy to work with, and I can be really happy with what I create every time I wear this palette. And for performance, I gave it a 4 because, again, like that Naughty Nude palette, all of the shimmers are really awesome. They do not flake, they do not smudge, they're really easy to work with. They don't have a lot of like glitter fallout. The mattes are really pigmented and easy to kind of like get on your eyes and blend out. And I love the fact that you have, you know, a couple of dark tones in here to be able to add a little bit of drama if you want to. So overall, 2.75 for Huda's Rose Quartz palette. And next are my 3s. And this has one of the shockers in it. This category has a shocker in it. A 3 for Tarte Maneater After Dark. it got a 2 for price because it was $54. And I didn't pay that, but overall, with the amount of shades that you get in here, even though it's $54, it's really a good bang for your buck. For versatility, I gave this one a 4 because look at all of the different colors that you can do. All different seasons, summer and spring, fall, spring. I feel like you can offer, so you have so much versatility with this eyeshadow palette. Definitely something that's great all year long. For preference, I gave it a 3 because I do feel like it is a good preference for me, but kind of blending into the performance of it, I tend to not gravitate toward this one too much because the shimmers have crazy fallout. So that's kind of why I docked down my preference, because I don't prefer this palette over some other ones because of the performance of some of the shades. So performance gets a 3. And preference gets a 3. And all of those points go to give this an overall 3 rating. And shocking. Are you ready for this? Shocking. My favorite palette, my ABH Cosmos palette. Right? It's my favorite one. At least I say that, but apparently it only gets a 3 based off of my super official point system that I've created. It gets a 2 for cost at $54. So again, with that criteria, it gets a 4 for versatility. I feel like this palette is so incredibly versatile, and I've talked about this so much. But one of the things that makes it oh so versatile is the fact that you can transform these shimmers by layering them on top of one of the dark shades, even like these. That creates a whole different vibe whenever you start layering these things on top of each other. It's just really, really magical. For preference, I gave it a 3 because these dark ones kind of scare me. This like slate gray color kind of, you know, it's a little scary for me, and the blue is not something that I wear like all the time. So for preference, as far as like what I'm thinking about I want to wear every day, there are a lot of shades in here that I would wear every day, but overall there's enough that I wouldn't wear every day that kind of docked it down to a 3. And for performance, I gave this a 3 also, only because these shimmers are so soft that you have to be so careful with them. Like, I hit pan on this, but really not, because I just was able to move the stuff around. My daughter, when I had gotten it last year, kind of like dug her finger in it very easily, so it's very soft. You have to be a little careful with this one. I've dropped it several times, and it's like the only eyeshadow palette that I have that has broken shades when I drop it. So that's why I gave the performance a 3 instead of a 4. Otherwise, if you're talking about putting it on your eyes, it's a 4. So overall, Cosmos gets a 3. Now we have quite a few eyeshadow palettes that ranked at 3.25, and we're going to start out with Mandalorian the Child palette. I feel like the price of some of these last palettes really helped to bump up their overall rating. This eyeshadow palette retails for $16, which is a really great price for a 9-pan eyeshadow palette with a mirror. For versatility, I gave it a 3 because it is very green, but unlike the Yucca palette, you do have some brown options. So you can kind of like go a couple different ways. And I like the fact that with the shimmers, I don't have to be stuck in a green, or I can pair the browns with a green shimmer, or I can, you know, kind of just really bop around and do, I think, a lot of different things with this one compared to the Yucca palette, which is heavy green. For preference, I gave this a 2 because just like the Yucca palette, the greens are really pushing me out of my comfort zone. For performance, I gave this a 4. I'm not having any problems with any of the shimmers, and the mattes are really easy to work with and easy to blend out. I am really loving this palette, and it shows because it has a 3.25 rating. Next, I have ColourPop's Lust for Dusk, which gets a 4 for price because it retails for $20. And you're about to hear a dog play fight because my puppies are really excited about all the eyeshadow rankings. For versatility, I gave this a 4 because you have warm tones, you have cool tones, you have brown warm tones, orange warm tones, and a wide variety of shimmers and you know, like super shocks and different things. And even because I'm wearing this on my eyes today, and I really feel like even something like a Night Lovers and Shaken, sorry, the A was kind of like messed up. Those really kind of help to add a little bit of extra dimension to it. So I really do feel like I like this palette. As far as color story, I just have not gravitated towards it a lot lately, but today I was feeling very motivated. But for preference, I gave it a 2 because, as I've said before, I find that also with this one, the performance of this one kind of a lot keeps me from pulling it out more often, and sometimes I just don't know what to do with these cool tones. Oops. I don't know what to do with these cool tones mixed in with the warm tones, and it really kind of throws me off. And as far as performance, I gave it a 3 because I feel like the mattes in this one are not great. The mattes in this are really good and easy to work with, but these ones I have to put it on and put it on and I have to put them on like 3 layers to get it to be the pigmented, the pigmentation that I want. So not quite sure why that is. If you have this eyeshadow palette, do you have the same problem with kind of getting it to actually show up on your eyes? I'm not sure, but it gets a 3.25. Next up, we have my newest cutie, which is the Natasha Denona Mini Starlit palette. It gets a 4 for price because it's $27. It gets a 2 for versatility because it's only 5 shades, you guys. You can't do a whole lot different stuff with it, but I do feel like it does create a complete look that you can do a couple of variations of, but you're not going to get a whole lot of difference with it. I gave it a 3 for preference because it really is quite my jam. I think that if there were a few more shades in here, I would give it a 4. One thing I'm really excited about is to get the Midi Starlit palette whenever she comes out with it. I'm excited to see what she creates with the Midi Starlit. And for performance, I gave it a 4. I don't have any problem with the shimmers staying on and getting fallout, and the mattes are nicely pigmented and really transform on the eyes. And this doesn't look like much, but when I put this on my eyes, it really shines and it really does create a magical look. So 3.25 for Mini Starlit. And the last 3.25 is another one of my favorites. It is the ABH Rose Metals palette, and it gets a 2 for price because it's $55, and it gets a 3 for versatility. Even though your look is going to be dark and grungy, you can do orange, you can do green, you can do purple mauve tones. You got this dark burnt orange, burnt mauve color in there. So I think that you can go a couple of different directions with this one. So it gets a 3 for versatility. And for preference, it gets a 4 for me because I love fall. This is fall in a palette. It has lots of different tones of things that I like, of green and brown and the warm mauve tones. So all in all, it gets a 4, and for performance, it gets a 4 too. I don't have any fallout, any flaking from the shimmers, and the mattes are really, really easy to work with and very, very blendable and really have a good impact on the eyes. So 3.25 for Rose Metals. Now, the only one that was at 3.5 is my CoverGirl Quad. This is Dreamy Pink, and she gets a 4 for price because it's only $10. It gets a 2 for versatility. Again, you can't do a whole lot with this, but I feel like you can get a complete look with it. You can do these two, all 4 of them. You can alternate, so variations of the same kind of look, same kind of tones. For preference, it gets a 4 because I love this color story. This color story is my jam. This is me in an eyeshadow palette. Love it so much. And for performance, it gets a 4 too. This has no problem blending with the mattes. I have no problem with fallout with the shimmers. It stays on my eyes all day, and for $10, this is such a great value. Easy, travel friendly, really great. 3.5 for that one. And the last 2, which aren't perfect, but they're pretty close, they get 3.75. And we're gonna start with ABH Norvina, which gets a 3 on cost because it originally retailed for $42. It gets a 4 for versatility because you have different seasons, in my opinion, that you can wear this. Fall, spring, you have pink, you have pinkies, you have purplies, you have browns, orange, a lot of different directions that you can go with this palette. It gets a 4 for preference because I love all of these tones. I think all of these tones really suit my eye color and just my personal preference on makeup, except for this one, not crazy about, but I do use it on occasion. And for performance, even though this palette is my oldest palette at like 3 years old, it still really works well. You don't get fallout with these. You don't get you know, flaking and smudging and disappearing with this palette on performance, and it gets a 4. So overall rating, a 3.75. The only thing that could have made it better if it was cheaper. That was it. And the last one is Too Faced Sweet Peach, which gets a 3 for cost because it retailed at the time for $49. It gets a 4 for versatility because with this one, I feel like it's great for one shadow looks. You've got kind of like monochromatic looks that you can go with. You have browns, pinks, purples, and greens. You have so much option and direction with the way that you can go with this one. For preference, total 4. Love all of these tones. I think that they really fit my vibe and the things that I like, and I think that look good and make me happy. And I like that you have liner shade options. I really like to pop like the dark green and the dark purples as a liner. That's really fun to do as well. And for performance, it gets a 4 too, because I don't get much fallout. When I use these as liners, I do get a little fallout, but that's because I'm using such a small, tightly, or like a dense brush. So I think if I wet the brush, it wouldn't create as much fallout. But overall, no fallout, no flaking, no smudging. It stays on all day. I don't have any kind of issue with the performance of my eye look once I get it on my eyes. So that is that one for 3.75. So thank you so much for watching. I was really surprised when I ended up doing this little experiment to rank each one of my eyeshadow palettes. I really thought Cosmos was gonna rank higher. I was really kind of surprised that Rose Metals ranked higher than Cosmos. But I think overall I'm pretty happy with my rankings, and if you ask me on a different day, I might give some different numbers, but that's what it is for today. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you like project panning and beauty content and inspiration. I will see you later. Bye.